scene where the monorail comes through the city and kind of collapses and goes underground. We built a replica of that, 50-foot high buildings in a studio in London, and we set up 47 explosions and about 23 cameras. I say we, I was a runner, I didn't do much of this. But the final day, we were working 8 till 8, and we had a sweepstake on what time we'd actually press go on everything, because we only had one chance to get it. If it went wrong, it was an absolute disaster. And the person that won the sweepstake had guessed 13 hours. So we started at 8 in the morning, and we finally hit record on the cameras at 9 p.m. And because the crew had gone into overtime, it was my role to go out and feed them. So I had to go to the local chippy and buy 95 cotton chips to feed the crew. So, like I said, crews move from show to show, and they quite often take people they like with them. It's just so happened that the assistant director on Batman Begins went on to Harry Potter, the fourth one, and he took me with him. My job was a runner again, but my job specifically was I had a golf buggy, and the child actors had to do a certain amount of schooling. And so I had to pick them up from their school, get them into costume and makeup, and then get them onto location by a set time. And because there was quite a lot of sitting around, I had a magazine on my dashboard. And one day I went to pick up Daniel Radcliffe in his full Harry Potter garb. And as we were driving down, he spotted my magazine. He said, "Oh, National Geographic." It was a Darwin special. And he said, we're studying Darwin in our lessons at the minute. What a coincidence. So I got to location, and I said, "Right, 5 minutes early, you can either sit here with me for 5 minutes, or you can just go and hang around on the side of set." He said, "I'll sit with you." So I had a 5-minute conversation with Harry Potter about the theory of evolution. But despite kind of, fun stories like that, and having seen some really cool stuff, I quickly became disillusioned with film. I'm going to be careful how I say this, because I know that some of you want to go into drama and film, and that's, great. But for me personally, and this is just my personal choice, even though I got to be a part of cool films and saw some amazing stuff, film just wasn't for me. I was a tiny cog in a massive machine. I wasn't particularly hands-on. A runner in film, nothing you do translates to what's on the screen, and I'm just a really impatient person. I worked with another runner who's a great runner. He'd been a runner for about 4 or 5 years, and eventually he got promoted to third assistant director, which is just kind of king of the runners. And I just couldn't be waiting that long, really. I was just, like I say, I'm too impatient. So I had a bit of a hiatus in which I sat up and built up a business while I thought about what it was I really wanted to do. And in that time, a couple of my friends started working in factual television, and I talked to them quite a lot about what they did and what it was like. And I decided that that sounded much more like me. So I decided to give it a go. So getting in, there's no real drama, factual television crossover. They're completely different industries, really. So it wasn't easy to get my foot in the door. I couldn't use any of my old contacts. But I really persevered, and I'll come back to this later to tell you how I did it and what you might do. And I basically got one interview, and I really made the most of that. And on the back of that, I got an internship at a company called RDF. They make shows like Shipwrecked and Crystal Maze, Secret Life of 5-Year-Olds, Eat Well for Less, so quite a kind of variety of shows, big offices. And internships are really rare. Mine consisted of 6 months as a runner, and then an automatic promotion in 2 months as a researcher. So it's a really good way in to be guaranteed that first kind of researcher role. So just to explain the TV hierarchy in the production channel. So it starts as a runner, similar level to runners, runner and a location assistant. Then it goes researcher, assistant producer, DV director for some people, producer director and edit producer, series producer, exec producer. Now, don't expect you to remember all them, but I'm going to go through them all one at a time in that production rung of the ladder. But there's also office-based jobs. So there's a production secretary, a production coordinator, and a production manager, and they're much more office-based jobs. The coordinator and the secretary will do things like booking travel, booking hotels, booking flights, booking the kit, sorting out all the kind of paperwork and logistics for a shoot. And the production manager is kind of one of the big bosses on a production, and they will be kind of overseeing the overall budget and schedules and making sure that all the delivery dates are hit, and they'll be in charge of it, making sure it all happens. So I'm going to take a quick second to talk to the women amongst you, because I would say in my experience that there is a point where some women if they want to be a director and the work's drying up, they'll start to get offered those coordinator and sort of production manager role jobs, which in my experience, the men don't get offered as much. If you want to be a director and you're on that role and you start getting offered these kind of production coordinator jobs, just turn them down unless you're really desperate for the work, because once you're in there, it can be quite hard to get back across. And sometimes that's a choice, because the production manager roles and the coordinator roles are often staff jobs. So that means you get maternity leave. So people take that route by choice. But if you want to be a director or a producer, then just kind of need to bat those offers away. I'm happy to talk more about that at the end if anyone wants to. So other roles then, and I'm not going to dwell on these because I'm sure you know them all, but very briefly, the shoot crew, there'll be location-only jobs, job-by-job roles. They're not really involved in the creative process. They just turn up and do the shoot and leave, and that'll be your camera operator, your director of photography and sound. And then there's the post-production teams, which will be edit assistant, editor, and your facilities teams. Edit assistant and editor, I would say, are more likely to be freelance jobs. They'll come onto a production, edit that show, and then they'll go off to another production company like the rest of us as freelancers. Whereas the facilities team work in one place. They'll be running all the Avids or whatever edit software that we're using. They will ingest all the footage, fix any problems. That'll be a kind of staff job, but they don't edit whole shows. So because of my experience, I'm going to talk about the production path. I'm happy to answer questions about the other jobs at the end if you have any, as far as I know them, but this is kind of my experience. So starting off as a runner. So everyone starts as a runner. I've had CVs from people straight out of university saying that they're directors, and I'm afraid to say they just don't really get taken that seriously. A tiny handful of people might make a film off their own back and get instant success, but I'd say 99.9% of people work their way up from the bottom. Every single person I've ever worked with has started as a runner and worked their way up. So that should be your kind of what you're expecting to do after university. I'm sure you all know what runners do, but it'll be all the odd jobs, driving, photocopying, getting lunches. You're quite often the first one in, the last one out. And it is an entry-level job, but it is absolutely brilliant for meeting people and learning the job. There's almost no training on the job in TV because independent companies just don't invest in freelancers. So you have to just pick it up as you go along. And running is a really good way to start to do that without the pressure of making a show. So just really make the most of it if you get a runner's job. Like I said, in my experience, I got an internship at RDF, and it was a huge office environment, kind of 4 floors, load of productions going on, lots to learn. And during the first few months, so just taking back a step, I think that most of you, probably your first runner job will be in an office environment. So I'll come back to that in a second, but like I said, in the first few months, even though I was always in the office, I got the odd day on location here and there. I worked on a show called Monster Munchies, in which we were filming someone making a half-ton Bakewell tart. I did a show called Kirsty's Homemade Home with Kirsty Allsop, which was a crafty type show. So already I was getting to see lots of different types of shows, how they're made, how different kind of genres are made, and different size crews and that kind of stuff. So it's really good grounding. You can just stand and watch and kind of take it all in. Well, not just stand and watch, you need to work hard. And they made a show called Secret Millionaire, which is the one that I identified as the one I wanted to work on. So what I did was my shift was kind of 8 till 6. And at 6 o'clock, I'd go to the Secret Millionaire team if they were still there and just offer to help out for an hour or two after my shift finished to try and impress them, because I wanted a job with them later on. And that worked well for me because I'd get a role with them later on. So that's the kind of basics of a runner. So a location assistant is very similar to a runner, but you're always out on location. You won't be doing any office stuff really. And I was a location assistant on Emergency Bikers, which is a Channel 5 police show. So I was basically getting some reverb there. Can you hear myself? Okay. So I was a runner. I was a location assistant on Emergency Bikers, which is a Channel 5 police show. Observational documentary following the Essex Motorcycle Police Unit. And I'd say a location assistant is slightly more hands-on than a runner. You'll be doing things like getting release forms. So I was getting release forms on Emergency Bikers. And a release form, as I'm sure you know, is if you film someone in the street and you want to put it on TV, you need to get their consent. and they do that by signing a release form. But because it was a police show, everybody that we were filming was getting nicked by the police. And sometimes they would get nicked by the police and we'd film it and they'd get thrown in the back of the police car and driven back to the police station. We'd have to follow them in our hire car. And eventually they'd be in a cell and I'd have to knock on the door and say, oh, hello, you might have noticed that I was filming you, we were filming you. Do you mind signing this to say it can be on telly? About 95% of them signed it. I've got absolutely no idea, but they seem very happy to be on TV. So as well as release forms, I was setting up cameras. So we had mini cameras on the back of the bike, the front of the bike, and I was completely in charge of setting those up. I was backing up all the footage in the evenings. I was writing notes for the edit. Because it was an observational documentary series with the police, we just filmed everything and hoped something happened. So there's reams and reams and reams of footage every day, and the edit just couldn't watch them all. So my notes would tell them what we filmed when, what was an A story, what was a B story, what they could disregard completely. But also, for example, we pulled over a guy who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and when he got out, the police said they could smell weed, and it turned out he had a massive bag of weed stashed in his pants. So in order to flesh that story out, a few days before, we'd done a little kind of scene where they were just stopping people in a small village that weren't wearing their seatbelts, and it was really boring. It never would have made the light of day on TV. But because we'd had that story, I said to them, oh, why don't you look up this story? And they kind of built a little package where it was like seatbelt, 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 big bag of weed down the pants. So my notes were kind of really helping the edit in that respect. So I learned loads on that job. It was just me and a director, a 2-man team for 3 months. As we got on well, and he started to trust me to let me shoot GVs, which are general views. So if we shot a story in Southend, for example, he would let me go and get loads of shots of Southend town centre to kind of, establish that scene. One day he was sick and I covered for him. So I was out on my own, did some fun stuff. I got to ride on the back of police bikes, So when that show went out, I saw my stuff all over that series, literally things that I'd filmed, things that I'd set up, places I was. So compared that to my first experience of film, I felt like this was much more where I wanted to be. Like I was hands-on from day one, 4 months into my career, and I could see my work on TV. So that is why I wanted to be in TV. There's one thing that I did learn the hard way on that shoot as well, which is a really obvious thing, but it's don't get back in the back of shot. And our director had a camera on his shoulder, and I was always that side of the director making sure I wasn't in the back of shot, but I forgot that our police officers were wearing shoulder cameras that we were using in the edit as well. I'm going to show you a quick clip and see if you can see the point at which I appear in the back of shot.
Okay. No. Have you got a knife?
No.
Okay. Where's that allegation come from? Have you had a knife? Look at me. I'm speaking to you.
Hello. You alright?
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm alright, you?
Yeah, not bad.
I like him. He's the right ears.
You know her, do you?
Not all bad. Yeah, we've met before. My colleague's going to have to give you a pat down just in case.
I don't want her to. I want her to.
Okay, well, maybe we can sort it out for you. Have you got anything on you that you shouldn't have?
No, I haven't.
Nothing
but
at all?
I know that copper.
Alright.
That's why I want her to
what have you got in
to
your
me.
pockets?
No.
Yeah. So the first I knew about that is when it went out live on telly, and I was absolutely mortified. I never made that mistake again with kind of body cameras. So moving on from location assistant then, the next job on the ladder is a researcher. A researcher will be one of the first people on production. They'll be finding stories and contributors. They'll be arranging shoots. They'll be helping out with shoots, feeding information to the directors and the presenters, as well as doing a lot of those kind of location assistant type jobs. So I did an observational documentary series called 10 Puppies and Us, which was on BBC Two, and the researchers on that were absolutely invaluable. So they started off by finding people who were about to get their first puppy. They'd research local parks and areas where we could film, get the permissions to film. They would find out what dog breeds the owners were about to get. They'd research the kind of behaviours to look out for in those dog breeds, what they did well and what they did badly. They'd write us information sheets so that we knew what to look out for on location. Quite often they'd be there, kind of just helping, talking into our ears, spotting things if the dogs were behaving as expected for that breed. So they were absolutely invaluable. It's the second rung up the ladder really, but it's already a really important job. As I said, I did an internship where I did 6 months of running and then 2 months placement as a researcher. And my research replacement was on a show called Stansted, The Inside Story, which was another observational documentary for Channel 5. And that was at Stansted Airport, obviously. and it was an absolute nightmare shoot. There was so much to organise. There was a million different organisations operating in the airport, all with their different levels of permissions. There's security to deal with. It wasn't like 10 Puppies and Us where you could plan in advance. We were quite reactive. We were kind of reacting to things as they were happening and trying to get permissions on the ground. But it was a brilliant experience, and I was really heavily involved. It was just me and the series producer organising it all, and then the directors out there doing it. So also, because there was so much going on all the time, I eventually begged the series producer to let me out with the camera for a few hours. And at the exact time I did that, there was a massive power failure. And they had to kind of drag people off the planes. They had to take all the bags off the planes because it was now a security risk. And I filmed everything and got everything I needed. And when it went out on telly, it was like a 7-minute segment. So it was my first research job, but my first full kind of length story that went out on telly. And that was a, absolutely incredible feeling. And as well as shooting that, I got to shoot TVs from air traffic control. I got to go underground in the baggage belts where you don't usually see. So even though it's fairly mundane airport stuff, that's my favorite bit of the job, kind of getting to access all those little places. Every single job is like that. You get to access all the little bits that other people don't usually see. So my other researcher job was on Secret Millionaire. Now I told you that I wanted to impress that team, and turns out seems like I did, because when I was freelance, they were the first people to offer me a job. And that was a really different type of role. I don't know if you know Secret Millionaire, it's probably a bit old now, but the concept is that a millionaire will go undercover in a community away from their own home, and they will work with people who are doing really good things in the community but don't have the money to fund it, basically. And then at the end of a week or 2 weeks with them, they'll reveal themselves. They'll say, I'm not really a journalist, I'm a millionaire, I love what you're doing, here's 50 grand to kind of continue your work. And I'm from Norwich, and I managed to persuade them to film our episode in Norwich. So it was a really kind of amazing, rewarding experience for me to be able to take that money into our community and film with people doing really amazing stuff. So I absolutely loved that job. So the point I'm making is, even though they're completely different jobs, there's different things that I love about each role. So after researcher, then the next role up is assistant producer. Now you're starting to get a certain level of seniority, much more responsibility. You'll be the right-hand person to the producer director. You might set up shoots and attend some early meetings with contributors completely on your own. You might, if you're a good shooter, you might go out and shoot items on your own, plus all the other things that a researcher does. Quite often the AP will help manage the researchers and runners on location to help the sort of director just concentrate on directing. So my first job was on an awful show, Channel 5, Obsdoc again, called Danger Diggers at Work, which is as bad as it sounds. Quite often a step up in role means a step down in the quality of show, because they're the people that will be more willing to take a punt on people who haven't got that experience. They'll have more smaller budgets. So if you're at the bottom end of the band, then they can afford you. So Danger Diggers at Work, like I say, it was an Obsdoc based on a JCB kind of hire firm, and as they hired the JCBs out, we'd follow the JCBs and see what they did, basically. Can't believe we got commissioned, to be honest with you. But my role was to be at that office, figuring out where the JCBs were going, finding out if it was an interesting story to film, and then sending the PDs out, basically getting permission, sending the directors out to do it. By the end of it, because there wasn't that much exciting stuff going on, the money started to run out, all the directors' contracts finished, and they were just let go. It was just me. So I was in there figuring out what might or might not be an interesting story, and then going out and filming it myself. So again, huge amount of responsibility for someone still relatively new to the industry and junior. But it's just a great learning curve. I mean, I had to learn fast and under pressure, and some days there'd be only one JCB going out, so I'd just go and film it and try and make something of it. I remember one day there's this young lad, and all he was doing all day was digging a hole there and putting them up there. And I can remember sat with my head in my hands thinking, how the hell am I going to make something remotely TV worthy out of this? But I had to think on my feet. I got talking to him. He was 16 years old, really new in the job. It was the first day that the boss had left him on his own. The boss was coming back at the end of the day. And so the story arc became, the boss is coming, can he do it without screwing it up? Boring as hell, never made it onto TV, but it could have done it. It was a story arc and it was all there. So thinking on my feet, learning to make a story out of, in terms of learning to make a story out of nothing, that was absolutely gold for me. In contrast to that, I flew directly from that role to Cavos, and I did a show as an AP called Party Paramedics, which later became What Happens in Cavos, I think. The premise is simple. We were based in a medical centre on the Strip, and absolutely hammered people would just stumble in at some point in the night and would film their stories. My shift was 10 p.m. till 5 a.m., 5 nights a week, and it was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. We had our team meetings every day at 5 o'clock with beers in the swimming pool. It was just funny, like people were funny, turning up really hammered. I suppose the only downside was that one camera guy got his camera pushed in his face. But because of that, we got 2 security guards. So every time I went out filming on the Strip, had these 2 massive security guards kind of batting people out of the way as we went down. It was just a real experience. I mean, I absolutely loved it. And my third AP job, I only had 3 AP jobs, and my third one was on a show called Bush Pilots for Dave, which was about pilots out in the wilderness in Botswana. So I spent 3 months out in Botswana, and I went out as an AP, but while I was out there, they sacked one of the directors and promoted me to a role called DV director, which is the next role I'm going to talk to you about. So a DV director is mainly just for shooters. So self-shooters, that is. So if you're a producer or a director that doesn't shoot, you'll never be a DV director. And it's quite a kind of dated term now, DV director, but it seems to have stuck around. So they will shoot segments of a show on their own. They'll have a certain amount of responsibility. Sometimes they just use a second camera as well in a bigger shoot, but they won't shoot whole shows on their own, and they won't do that much kind of directing. You'll give them a little pocket, like a 5-minute segment that you need doing, they can go and get it. So I was a DV director on Bush Pilots, and I was given my own set of pilots to film with. I had to develop their backstories. I had to film stories that would develop from episode to episode. I think it was a 12-part series, and so they wanted kind of recurring things. So one of the things that I latched onto was training, and I'm going to share a little thing that I filmed of a training session, just to kind of warning that the sound is terrible on this, and this is the sound directly from their comms. So this is as it was, but that's where the sound's terrible. Here we go.
Bush pilots have no autopilot, no radar, often no radio communication, and no co-pilot to rely on. This flight test is designed to make sure Ed can handle any emergency thrown at him. Dale will push him to the limit and make sure he's up to the job of keeping his passengers alive, no matter what happens.
So what I'm going to do now then, I'm going to do what we call unusual attitude. I'm going to take control of the aircraft. I'm going to make him put his head down and close his eyes. And once I have control of the aircraft, I'm going to try to disorientate him with his eyes closed, not having any visual reference, and then tell him to open his eyes, and he'll take control of the aircraft, and we'll see how he recovers from that. Getting it right and getting it spot on where he says is crucial for Ed at the moment. It is a failing part of the test, so if he doesn't get it right, he will fail the flight. Yeah, so I'll take control. You have control. Yeah, if you can close your eyes and put your head down for me. And feet off the rudders.
Hoping to disorientate Ed, Dale puts the plane into a spiralling nosedive. And then he cuts the engine. And with the plane falling fast, hands control back to Ed.
You have control.
Ed has just seconds to recover his bearings. Turn the engine back on and right the plane. From potential disaster to safety.
Everything forward, back into the climb at 6,000 feet. Nice. That went very well, so he came out of his disorientation and managed to get orientated and control the aircraft.
Ed has done well so far, but Dale's not finished with him yet.
I'm not sure those cutaways quite do that story credit. That plane kind of just fell back out of the air. I was sat in the back with a camera on my shoulder, my head smashed against the roof. Like, that was such a terrifying moment. But I absolutely loved that shoot. I had the most fun ever doing any of my jobs. I think I spent 100 hours in the air filming flights. By the end, I got to know all the pilots, and they used to let me fly. There was one flight when I had nothing to film. I was filming the return flight, and they let me fly for 4 hours, and unofficially landed at an airport. Also, they sent me out to film. They had these kind of remote landing strips out in the bush, and they sent me out to film some work being done on the landing strip. And they said, "Oh, we're not really sure when the next flight back will be to collect you. So just go out there, film the story, and we'll pick you up when we pick you up." And it was 5 days before they could get a plane out to me. And the only accommodation was this £1,000 a night luxury kind of safari lodge. So I stayed just as a guest for 5 nights, going on game drives and stuff and getting paid to be out there. Not every job in telly is like that by any means, but every now and again you get a good one. So, DV director, the next role up is where pretty much I am now, and that is producer director. Now, producer director is not the top job, but it is the most important on location. So it used to be 2 jobs, producer and director, and now usually it's 1. Sometimes if there's a bigger crew, you'll still get a producer and a director. And I've been a producer, but most of them, because they're the kind of smaller budgets, most of them will be PDs, as we call them. So, what a director does, I'm sure. I mean, sometimes they'll direct and shoot whole programs. Direct and sometimes self-shoot whole programs. And in factual television, us directors tend to write the script ourselves as well. We'll do the shoot plan, and then on the shoot we'll decide what is filmed, how it's done. We'll direct the presenters, the crew. If it's an observational documentary, we'll self-shoot with contributors, so you're working with people who aren't used to being on camera. You manage the team on location, so you're the kind of top person deciding when everything happens and when, and get it all going, unless there's a producer. So there are loads of different types of directing. For me personally, on Travelman and Attenborough and the Giant Elephant, I had a crew, both of completely different sizes, and I'll tell you more about those in a second. On A League of Their Own, which I was a producer, we had a crew of 50. So the series director, he just really worked with the talent, the presenters. Then there was a PD who would go around mopping up things that the main crew weren't getting, which is quite often the reaction interviews, GVs, things like that. There's an assistant director and 2 producers, and the producers, we'd just kind of be on the periphery setting everything else up, which included some camera stuff. So because we had 50 crew members, we had 2 specialist mini camera operators. And so all the there's a lot of in-car stuff on League of Their Own. And so as a producer, I'd be looking ahead on the schedule and saying, right, we've got a car scene coming up this afternoon, making sure they're in the cars, getting the camera set up so there's no lag when they come out of this scene. They just want to get in that car and go, and all the cameras be ready. So the producers would help a little bit more, just kind of making sure everything was happening. Like I said, I worked on 10 Puppies and Us and Emergency Bikers, which I was a location assistant on. I went back as a director, and they were just kind of 2-man bands. There was me and a researcher, me and a location assistant, and I was self-shooting, no other help from anybody else. So as you can see, there's no average job, there's no average day. Every job is completely different. It's all quite fluid. Sometimes you don't even know what kind of job it's going to be until you're out there doing it, other than self-shooting, like you know if you're going to be self-shooting or not. But so you have to be really flexible as a director. I would say on a shoot, the most important things are to be flexible and adaptable. Things go wrong all the time. Things don't go as you expect. My method of working is that I am a meticulous planner. I will have my script and my shoot plan and my shot listing. I'll have everything there in my pocket all the time. And then I just allow myself to be completely fluid on location. Sometimes, especially with factual television, it's not like drama in that you know what you're going into and you know exactly what's going to happen. Factual television, sometimes something might not be as good as you're hoping it would be. Sometimes something might just happen that's more interesting. You have to kind of react to that. So it's really important to just, from an early point in your career, to start being able to kind of adapt and be fluid. Obviously working with talent can be fun, but it can also be a challenge. Different presenters work completely differently. Some want to be really involved and some don't. You know, some want you to literally tell them every single step they take and every word they say, and they'll just repeat it verbatim. Some really want to sit down with you and discuss the scene and be more collaborative. So yeah, every job's completely different. So it's good to be, prepared for all eventualities, really. So, so as I've said a couple of times, I worked on Attenborough and the Giant Elephant. I'm just going to show you a quick clip of that so you get a sense of what I did there.
The David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust in Kenya knows exactly how difficult it is. Headkeeper Edwin Lucici, like Scott, is caring for a new orphan who has just arrived.
This elephant close to me is called Musiara. He was rescued from the Masai Mara. He was found stuck in the mud when he was only about 2 months old. And he seems to have stayed there for quite some time because he was very skinny, very thin and very weak. A sign that he had been without the mother for quite some time. And we hope for the best for him.
Musiara is so traumatized by his experience, a keeper will have to stay by his side 24 hours a day.
There's no quick, easy fix when raising orphaned elephants. I mean, you're in for the long term. Some arrive in perfectly good shape, but the majority have had a dramatic story before they get to us.
The first step is straightforward physical care, but they need more than that. Elephants are highly social. Musiara, like Jumbo, needs what he would have received from his elephant family: constant company, touching, and love.
They need that emotional support. Elephants are all about love and family, and that is what our orphans have been robbed of. And one has to very, very quickly plug that gap. And it really is the keepers at this early stage where that strong bond is formed.
Matthew Scott's autobiography makes it clear that he instinctively gave Jumbo the emotional support he needed.
So that was a 1 hour single documentary. The story was that Jumbo was a Victorian era elephant, and they didn't want it to just be an archive show. They didn't want it to all be kind of historical. And part of Jumbo's story was that he was an orphan and he was kept in isolation. And in later life, he had a lot of rage issues, which they think was a result of being in isolation as a baby. So they sent me out to Kenya to film a contemporary story about an orphan to show how they looked after today, in contrast to how they were 100 years ago. So I was out in that elephant orphanage in Kenya for a couple of weeks. First of all, I had to find an orphan to focus on. Sadly, 50% of the orphans that arrive in that orphanage die, they say, of a broken heart. So I had to I identified Musiara and we hung around for a few days to make sure he survived, and then we kind of concentrated on his story. Now, because this is a high-end documentary, I had a really detailed script and I had to get everything in it shot beautifully, no negotiation. I was there to get what they wanted, and that was that. So, like I say, in contrast to some other ones where it's more flexible, there was no flexibility in that. It was me and a Canadian director of photography and a local soundman, but it was an absolute privilege to work on that show. I was in that herd of orphans every day, just kind of walking around all day, every day with a load of elephants. That little one, I spent so much time with him that in the morning when I went into the orphanage, he'd run and wrap his trunk around my neck and kind of suck on my fingers every morning. Really miss him, actually. Anyway, so that's Attenborough and the Giant Elephant. And then just to show you a different bit of work, I'm going to show you a clip from Travelman. So that was Travelman. On Travelman, I had a 11-person 2-unit crew, including a DV director. And so the schedule, unlike Attenborough, the Attenborough one, we only had to make a fairly short amount of TV and we had almost 2 weeks to do it. Whereas on this, I had to film the whole episode in 2.5 days. And so I had a 11-person crew. The second unit was a DV director and somebody to assist the DV director. And how I directed that, so for example, the scene you just saw with the, in fact, a restaurant scene. So if I was to film a restaurant scene, I would get the presenters in, get the crew in, film everything we needed from that, and then we'd move on. And just before we'd leave, the DV director would come in and have a quick meeting with him. And I'd say, I need you to get exteriors of the building, shots of people eating, shots of waiters and waitresses bringing out food. Here's what they ordered. Can you go to the kitchen and film the chefs ordering those? And then I'll see you at the next thing. Because if I got my crew to film all that stuff, that's dead time where the presenters aren't working. So we just had to keep them moving. And the DV director followed us along, mopping up everything that I needed in each scene. So as well as telling the crew what I wanted from them at every setup, obviously I had to brief Richard O'Reilly and Aisling, as well as any contributors we film with, like the Hungarian teacher. Richard is different to directing a lot of presenters because he's got such a kind of unique way of talking and thinking and being funny, and he's very off the cuff. So for him, it's a travel show, so there's a certain amount of information. So I would tell him, enter here, that's who you're talking to, here's 4 information points you want to get in, do your thing. I mean, I wouldn't dream of telling Richard O'Reilly how to be funny or what to say. So for him, that's his way of working. He was absolutely brilliant, really, really good to work with. Because time was tight, I just had to keep everyone on everyone all day. Let's go, let's keep moving. So it's quite a stressful job, but really fun. And talking about being adaptable, I don't know if any of you have seen Travel Man, but the end scene is always Richard and the guests. They sit somewhere with a nice vista, and they kind of reflect on the time they've had. And we'd booked, I think it was like a rooftop area of a castle overlooking Budapest, something like that. But just as we were about to film it, absolutely teamed down. And we had to be at the airport in 2 hours. So I just sent all of the crew in different directions and said, just somebody find us a location. And somebody phoned me at some point and said, I found this kind of oyster bar under a canopy, and they're going to charge us £1,000. It's like, just do it. And thankfully, we managed to squeeze in a very beautiful final scene. Well, not very beautiful, but pretty good final scene. So yeah, be adaptable, don't stress, keep a calm head. It all works out in the end. So, like I said, producer-director, there's a kind of a similar level position called edit-producer. Now, traditionally, of course, a director would sit in their own edit and edit their own shows, but mainly for budget reasons these days, shoots and edits are kind of quite often happen at the same time. So if it's a UK-based shoot, quite often I will shoot something with the crew on one day, and that night or the next morning it will be going back to the edit, being ingested, and then either the next day or the day after that they'll start to edit it. So because there's not a director sat with the editor, we have this role called edit producer. Now, edit producers sit in with the editors. The editor does the magic of, working the Avid and pressing the buttons, making the legwork, bringing it all together. Where the edit producer will tend to write the voiceover script, choose the music, and then together you've got a mass of footage and you'll pick the best bits to tell the story in the best way possible from what you've been given. So as well as being a producer on A League of Their Own, I also did an edit producer job. And I was given a kind of vague script that they should have followed, but it's quite a loose script. So mainly a kind of list of funny ideas for things for them to do. So quite often I'd have to write the script from scratch, including all the voiceover for James Corden, Jamie Redknapp and Freddie Flintoff, all of who have completely different voices and ways of speaking. So that's an edit producer role, which I've done a few times. Above the director and edit producer is a series producer, and I haven't done this yet, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But it's the kind of big boss in production. They oversee all the shows, all the shoots, all the edits. They'll manage the whole team, working with the production manager. They will try and, they might write schedules. The reason I don't fancy it at the minute, and I will do eventually, but it's, they don't often go out on location. It's kind of, sometimes they do. On A League of Their Own, the series producers are out on location, actually. But most of the shows I worked on, the series produced in the office, and I'm not ready for an office job yet. So they will kind of have viewings with the channel. There'll be that kind of link between the production and the production company and the channel. So that's the kind of most senior freelancer job that will come in on a production. Above them, however, is an executive producer. And that's kind of the top job before you get to the channel. An exec producer is generally a staff job, and we're talking like 100 grand a year job. So their job in the main is to go to the channels and get commissions. And then the shows that they get commissioned, some shows that aren't their commissions, but they'll oversee lots of different shows within the production company at one time. They're generally not that hands-on, but they will keep tabs on what's happening through the series producer. Once the show's made and everybody's seen it and happy with it, the exec producer will have a viewing or two. They'll make their changes, and then the exec producer and the series producer will then take it to the channel. So that is all the job roles, mostly in TV. So at the end of this part, which is part one, Darren, do you have any questions for this part, or shall I crack on to part two? Location, I mean, they're very similar, but you can go straight from runner to researcher. And location assistant runner, TV jobs are so fluid that quite often they all blend into each other. But yeah, you can absolutely go runner to researcher if you didn't want to be someone that was out on location. If you wanted to be somebody that stayed in the office, yeah, I'm sure you could find those roles. But I don't know where that would go as you go up the ladder. If you really didn't want to go out on location for some reason, then you could start, as you got up to kind of assistant producer and stuff like that, you could go into casting and jobs like that, which were more office based. But do let me know why you asked that question, because I'd be interested to know if it's because you didn't want to go out onto location. Pretty much everybody, apart from the occasional role like production manager, is freelance, right the way up to exec producer, because it's quite cost effective for production companies not to have a lot of staff on their books. So when they get a commission, they'll go out and hire a load of freelancers to make the show. And in part two, in which I'm going to very briefly explain the kind of process, I'll kind of explain that to you. Just to go back to that point, actually. So when you get to DV director, I think you can become self-employed, but all the other roles from runner up to DV director, including assistant producer, you'll be on the payroll. So you'll be PAYE on a short-term contract. And then when you get above AP, you can become self-employed, but it's all freelance. Well, like I said, there's the kind of crew role like sound, but if you don't want to be on camera, you could still be a director or a producer and not shoot, but it'll just affect the kind of jobs that you do. So observational documentaries are small crews in which the director will be expected to shoot. Basically, if there's anything with a presenter in it, you tend to get a camera operator. So if you want to direct or produce, I suggest you try and find a kind of genre of factual television, if that's what you want to do, that has presenters in it, because then you can direct a crew, you can produce a crew, and you won't actually have to get your hands on a camera. And there's plenty of those around as well. I would say that shooting gives you a wider scope of jobs that you can take, but if you don't shoot, then there's still plenty of work for you. All right, so I'll crack on with part two then. So they're all the jobs. I'm going to talk to you very briefly now about the process of making a channel, from idea to it being on the TV, just in a nutshell, really. So there's no set time frames. All the schedules are completely different. You'll get fast turnaround shows like the Gadget Show, which Darren said I worked on. They will shoot their studio segment on a Tuesday and it'll be on TV on a Friday. I mean, they drop BTs in, but essentially that's a pretty quick turnaround. The Attenborough show I did took about a year to make, which is fairly standard, I'd say. Something like Blue Planet, I think we shot over 4 years. So there's absolutely no hard set rule about how long it takes to make a show. I would say the first bit and the hardest would be getting a commission. Sometimes a freelancer like myself might have an idea, and if you get that written up, you can team up with a production company to take that to a channel. Freelancers generally don't just take it straight to channels. If you have an idea that you set up with a production company, obviously you've got to strike a deal with them about the finances and who makes what money out of it. And then they might take it to the channel on your behalf. But I would say most production companies have got their own development teams on the payroll in-house working day after day. So it's much more cost effective for them to pitch their own ideas because they haven't got to share the profits with you. So the exec producers will take those ideas to channels, and I think the rate of success is 1 in 100. So 1 in 100 ideas that get pitched will get commissioned, and sometimes it'll be the crap ones. So, but once a show is commissioned, the channel will give the production company a budget, a set amount of money to make it. The production company will take a percentage of that off as their kind of profit, and then the rest of it will be the budget you've got to make the show. And then at that point, they will go into pre-production. So pre-production will be the planning, the research, the hiring of a team of freelancers. As Honey asked, that's the point when all the freelancers come in. You'll book everything that's needed, get it all into place, and then get going. Production is generally as short as possible. They'll condense it. A lot of companies, not so much now, but there's quite a lot of companies that will try and make you do 6-day weeks to get it done because, like I said, the longer people are on the payroll, the more it costs them. They've got to pay for crew, camera equipment, sound equipment, travel, hotels, food, hire cars. It's an expensive thing. I would say the kind of show I work on tends to have a budget of between 60 and 120,000 pounds for a 1 hour show, I reckon. League of Their Own, and I'm speculating here, I'm not sure, but I think the budget would be nearer to about 800,000 pounds for 1 hour, I reckon. So yeah, quite a lot of money. So after the shooting period, obviously you get the edit. On a show like Travel Man, which is a half an hour show, I was given 2 weeks to edit the show and then a week for changes. So me and the editor were left for 2 weeks on our own. Once it was done, we showed it to the series producer, the exec producer, and then it would go off to the channel and come back. So that final week was just kind of showing it to people, doing their changes, showing it to someone else, doing their changes. So I'd say about 3 weeks for a half an hour show and double that for a 1 hour show, generally. So once it's gone to the channel and they're happy, we do what's called a picture lock. Once it's picture locked, it then goes into the online edit, and that will be the grade, the dub. At that point, it'll still have the edit producer's voiceover on it because you don't get a presenter in to do every bit of voiceover you write. So the edit producer will have their voice on it until it's absolutely finalised. And once that script's finalised, they'll get the presenter in and the voiceover will go on. And then when all that's done, it's delivered to the channel, and then it's completely out of our hands. They will put it on when they see fit. Sometimes they want to get it out straight away. Sometimes they want to sit on it. They're always playing off against each other's kind of schedules to try and either disrupt other channels' good shows or find a slot where there's nothing good up against their show. So it's a bit of kind of game of cat and mouse. So in terms of contracts for someone like me, a freelancer, I would say the average contract for somebody like me is 3 to 6 months. So freelancers are always looking for work, and I absolutely love that. It can be nervy in the early days, but I really love the variation. I absolutely love that, one day I can be in Kenya with a herd of elephants, and the next day I'm riding around chasing the police around. Like, that variation is exactly why I do the job, and I love it. So I told you that was brief. That is a quick overview of how TV is made. Any questions on that? That is a good question. So quite often we use local fixes. So in Kenya, there's a sound man that we used in Kenya called David Jalenga, who I think is actually quite a well-known sound man. He travels all around that part of Africa, Tanzania, and doing quite big jobs. I think everybody knows him. But quite often you'll use fixers. So when we film in whatever country we film in, we will find a local fixer. Quite often we'll take our own crew, but it is good to use local crews where possible. So the fixer will not have good contacts in the area. So fixers will set up everything for us. Like if you're filming in a different country, they will set up all your transport, all your hotels. They'll put you in touch with local crews. They'll, prepare everything for you. So if the kind of subtext to that question is that you'd like to be Kenya based, but maybe get some work on some British crews, then I would find some Kenyan fixers that work with British TV companies and kind of put yourself available. Runners, for example, are the sort of things that we are much more likely to use local crews for. That's a really good question. So how do you get a career in TV, and what can you do to get ahead? So the main thing I'd say to you is start now. While you're at college or university, or before your college, if you haven't started yet, just get relevant work experience. By hook or by crook, loads of companies take on work experience people. I was going to say, make some contacts. If you haven't got any contacts, email me and I'll try and put you in touch with people or get you on my shows, which I've done with loads of young people in college, university. Just offer yourself out for free. Start a contacts book. 90% of TV is word of mouth and contacts. So most of the jobs that I've had will be people that I've worked with before will either take me onto different shows, or they will recommend me to someone else, and someone says, oh, somebody gave me your phone number. Quite a small amount of it is sending your CV in blind to a company that are advertising a role. So start a contacts book. Remember people that you've been in touch with. If you know the kind of shows that you want to work on, find out what the production company is that makes those types of shows and target them. See if you can get work experience with specific companies that make the kind of shows you want to work on. Most cities have some kind of production company there. I'm from Norwich, there's production companies there. I live in Oxford now, there's production companies here. There's only really, I think they're called Quicksilver here, who make Unreported World. But there's loads of smaller indie companies that make corporate stuff, and even that's better than nothing. If you can get into TV companies, if you want to make TV, that is, then yeah, do that. But if not, get into just any experience you can, really. As I've said before, get your hands on a camera if that's what you want to do. Beg, steal or borrow, but get shooting as much as you can. Good shooters will move forward much quicker because they're so valuable on location. Apart from on like big shows with, like A League of Their Own, they wouldn't have junior shooters, but most shows, if someone can pick up a camera and add another angle, then they're really valuable. So get your hands on the camera now, make your mistakes, get them out of the way, and so that when you get onto a crew, you can offer to shoot when needed. Take some time to watch a variety of TV, really mix it up, know what you like and what you don't like and why. I have sat in on interviews with people who are trying to get into TV who say they don't watch much TV and they just won't get work. I mean, yeah, it sounds simple, but watch a big variety of TV shows that you wouldn't really expect or want to watch. Just get a kind of good grasping of the industry. So how to get that first job. Lots and lots of people will be looking for that first job. And the main thing I'd say is don't get disheartened. There will be times when you're out of work, but you will make it. I worked with a lad, when I did my internship, there's about 6 of us runners in the office at any one time. And this lad had done a media degree. He was really keen to do it. He was a good runner. We did our 6 months together. And then he had about 6 or 7 weeks where he was out of work and he panicked and got a job in insurance. And that's it. He's still working in insurance 10 years later. And it's because he just really panicked and didn't think the next job was coming when you do have those long breaks out. So another thing I'd suggest is setting yourself up for that in case it takes a while. Like if you've got an expensive flat in London that's, you have to pay a lot of rent every month, you are going to get desperate and find something to pay the bills. But if you can find a way to set yourself up, either by saving up beforehand, or what I did was I lodged with my girlfriend's parents for 6 months, so that if I was out of work, I wasn't panicking and thinking I'd be out on the street. Add lots of different people on social media. Look for job call outs. There's loads of groups on Facebook. There's runner specific groups. There's last minute TV groups where they put a call out for people quite often. I mean, there's quite a lot of people in those groups now, but somebody gets the job right. So there's loads and loads of companies where you can put your CV on databases, including the BBC and ITV, and there's one called Talent Bases, there's Production Base, there's loads where you can put your CV on, and somebody might pluck that out if they need a runner. Like I said, if you target the companies that you want to work for, find out who their head of talent is. Each production company will have a small talent team. There'll be a head of talent and maybe 1 or 2 others, and they are in charge of hiring everybody on all the productions pretty much. Sometimes a series producer will have people they like to work with, but head of talent will really be on the ball of what productions coming up, what are going on, what needs staffing. And if you can, phone them, find the phone number and just phone them, because they will get a million emails every day and CVs will just kind of be battered aside. But if you can get them on the phone, you can talk your way into getting an interview and getting a foot through the door. a lot of the head of talents are kind of aware of this, and they'll kind of have the secretaries shield calls a bit. But if you can get them on the phone, that's what I did essentially, and I managed to get my foot in the door. Everyone you contact, even if they have no work, ask if you can check back in a couple of weeks and do so. Don't be fobbed off. If they're getting lots of calls and emails from lots of different people every day, but there's one person that calls every week or every 2 weeks, that'll be the name that's in their mind when something comes up. So you have to find that balance. So you're not pissing people off, you're not sort of going over the top and really bugging people, but you're just there enough to remind them that you're looking for work. And if they haven't got any work, ask them if they know anyone else that's got work. You have to be proactive. Nobody's going to come looking for you. You have to really sell yourself in those early days. And there'll be lots of people doing the same as you. And try and make your CV stand out a little bit from the hundreds of others. Keep it really relevant. So earlier I said, get that work experience now. If you get that work experience when you're going for your first job, that's what will be on your CV, and you can talk about that. In all honesty, nobody's really going to read anything about jobs in retail or cafes or anything. So make sure you've got something relevant to say on your CV, even if it's, what different cameras you can use, what edit software you can use. And admittedly for SAE students, I hope this will be a bit easier for you because you'll have all that stuff as part of your course as well. But, if you've had work experience, sell it. Where did you work? Who did you work for? Which production companies? What did you do other than make coffee? Did you do one kind of slightly more elevated job? Did you work closely with the director? Were you logging? Really sell yourself. Don't be frightened to put a few bullet points under each job title, because that will be the thing that the talent heads read. Overall, keep the faith. It will come. I don't know anybody that's just never ever managed to get their first runner's job. So it will come. Just keep the faith. It'll happen. So assuming you get your first interview, TV interviews are really informal. They tend to be just a chat, but there's still a really, really good chance to impress. It doesn't have to be about your experience. Even if you haven't had any work experience, there's still ways you can really, really impress in that first interview. Watch as many shows, different shows by that production company as you can before you go in. Know what you like and what you don't like and why. And when I say what you don't like, if your interview is with the head of talent, they didn't make the show, so they're not kind of precious about them. And I'm certainly not by any means suggesting you go in and slag off all their shows. But when I went in for my interview at RDF, I just had a couple of small light points where I said, I was interested in the choice of doing it this way because, perhaps this might have been another option, or, and I could see the head of talent kind of thought, oh, right, this guy is actually thinking about it. He's got a critical mind, and, she gave me the job. So if you've just got something to say about their shows, like I say, be careful not to just slag it off. But if you've got something to say about their shows that's slightly of a critical mind, you'll really stand out in that interview. Have a list of programs that you love. And know why. Talk about them with passion. You'll really stand out. They want people who care. Know what you want to do long term. Don't be afraid if you want to be a director, as long as you understand the process, that you're not going to go in and be a director straight away. But if you want to be a director long term, say that. Say I want to be a director, and I'm willing to work hard to get there. Know what type of TV you want to work in. Is it documentaries or drama or comedy or game shows or studio shows, history? And have some questions ready for them. And a great question to ask them is, what have you got going into production soon? Or what productions have you got ongoing? And do they need crewing up? So, just be a bit smart in that interview. Assuming you've aced it, because you've taken all my advice there, you've got your first job. Now, what I'm going to say from here is going to sound fairly obvious and fairly basic, but I make no real apology for that because I've seen so many people fall at the first hurdle. I'd say that 80% of the runners I've worked with haven't been great. So if you do these basics well, I promise you'll absolutely stand out a mile. I worked with this one lad who's an intern from National Geographic, and I think he was doing about a 6-month internship there. And they placed him on a show that I was doing for 2 weeks. And it was another airport show based at Heathrow. And because we couldn't have a base on the site at Heathrow, we had a little Airbnb nearby. And we had all our kit there. We had a basic edit there where we did some rough cuts before we sent them back to the edit. And he turned up at the Airbnb on the first morning, and I turned up, collected my kit and said, oh, do you want to come down to location? So he came down to location with me, didn't ask me a single question all day, didn't really seem that interested in what was going on. So I thought, okay. Next morning, he turned up at the Airbnb. I said, "Oh, you coming down to location?" He said, "No, I might just sit here today." And I said, "Okay, you want to sit and watch the edits?" He said, "Yeah, I want to sit and watch the edits." At the end of that day, they said he hadn't really watched the edits. He'd been on his phone all day. And then for the rest of that week, he just turned up, put his bag down, sat down on his phone all day. And then in the second week, the series producer said, don't bother coming back. Like, an internship with National Geographic is such an amazing thing, but there are plenty of people who just turn up and think they're going to make a career without working hard. So if you're a good runner, you will stand out a mile, I promise. So, like I say, your first job is likely to be in the office as an office runner. Work hard, even if others aren't. Like I said, when I was a runner, there were 6 of us, and if there wasn't much to do, we could start messing around a bit, and the kind of laughter levels would go up, and eventually someone would come over and have a word if we were being too noisy. So I quickly cottoned on that I just needed to look busy. So when the noise levels started to creep up, I would just grab a stack of random papers and just walk around the office looking busy. Walk quickly, look busy. Nothing will get you noticed for the wrong reason quicker than laziness. Just be positive doing all the rubbish stuff, do it with a smile, use it as a chance to meet people. You know, if you're making coffee, if you're doing a round of coffees, chat to the people that you're making coffees for, ask about their shows, ask about their job roles and what they do. Every single one of them will have done what you're doing at some point. They'll all have been runners. Just be genuinely interested in people. It's a great way to learn. It's a great way to meet people. You know, don't wait to be asked to do something. Look for ways to be helpful, kind of see what people need before they know they need it. And offer to help everybody. You never know who you're going to be impressing or who's talking to who, you know. Even somebody that you don't think is beneficial to your career, it might be the receptionist on the front door. You know, be kind to them, help them, get them a coffee as well, because they will be talking to the head of production and kind of reporting back to you. So just, you know, look after everybody. If there's a specific show that you like, help out after hours like I did on Secret Millionaire. Don't be afraid to ask if you can go out and shoot. So, you know, they won't be necessarily thinking to kind of help everybody that's in the office. But if you're coming forward and saying, you know, if I get a chance, I'd love to go on a shoot, you'll stand out among everyone else. On location, if you're a location runner, just be on the ball always. Again, it sounds basic, but I've known more than one runner who, if they haven't been very busy, they've just gone and sat in a car. You should always be on hand without getting in the way. You know, if you're in somebody's eye line, but just stood far enough away to not be in the way, but close enough so if somebody needs you, you're there. It's really helpful. So often at the key moment when you need the runner to help you out, they're not there. I don't know why that is. Have a pad with like a to-do list, because you might have a few people throw different jobs at the same time. If you forget something, it's really not good. So have a to-do list and, you know, get things done. Have a bag full of pens and paper and snacks for people and charge batteries and memory cards and all that kind of stuff if that's what they need. Just have it all to hand, because if somebody says, have you got a pen, and then you disappear for 10 minutes looking for a pen, it's such a fast-paced industry that it's much better if you're just kind of there and ready and on it. And again, I know this sounds basic, but so few people do it. If your job is to go out and get release forms for people, if you're out on the street or filming somewhere that needs releasing, just get a good sense of when's the right time to do it. We had one guy on that Stansted show, actually, who was so keen to release people that he'd step in and start getting to release form before we'd finish filming. Or, you know, we might film with somebody and just move here for a second, and then when we move back, he'd be right in there releasing people. And it became such a kind of running joke. It was a bit annoying as well, to be honest. But it became such a joke that he became really paranoid about it. And the amount of times the camera would swing round and you'd see him kind of dive behind a post or something. And one time, the camera moved around and he was there, and he jumped backwards onto one of those shuttles that go between terminals, and the doors closed, and we just saw his panicked face behind a window, and as the train just disappeared off to the other terminal. We didn't see him for about an hour. So know when to release people, make sure people don't get away without being released. You know, you're responsible for that. Make sure you do it. Make sure you get all the details needed. As I said, in the office, see what people need before they need it. If someone's flagging, offer to get them a coffee. If somebody's patting around, be there with a pen. You know, it's really easy to absolutely stand out, and good runners will progress so quickly. They're just gone. Good runners will be gone. You know, you can never get hold of a good runner, because everybody will know they're great and they'll progress really quickly. Ask questions, be interested, but know when to do it. I would say that there's no training in TV, like I've said before, so be really keen to learn. You know, learn for yourself by watching, but also if there's a bit of downtime, you might want to ask questions about why a director did that, or why a camera operator decided to shoot something in a certain way. as long as, you know, you're not mid-scene and you're tapping everybody in the shoulder asking questions, people don't mind. You know, like I say, we've all been there, we've all done it, and runners that show an interest and are keen will stand out. And the biggest thing I'd say is just enjoy it. You know, I have been all over the world. I've done amazing things, met amazing people. I've got friends who work in banks in London earning 200 grand a year who are really jealous of what I do. It does have its downsides, you know. You're away from home quite a lot. There's no pay between contracts, but it's a great life and an absolute privilege, and I love my job. So that's it for me. Thank you for listening. I hope I've been of some use, and now I'm happy to do a kind of more general Q&A. So a lot of it is word of mouth. So I mean, my contacts book, like I said, every single person that I've worked with, I take their numbers, and in the early days, I'll be texting everybody saying, do you know of any work? Have you got any work? Do you know anyone else that's got any work? You know, hassle people. And then it kind of snowballs. So if you've got a good reputation, it'll work the other way around. People will come looking for you. So just remind me of the question, how do you get work as a freelancer and known to production companies?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so production companies, once you've worked for them once, if you made a good impression, they will use you over and over again, because production companies will have lots of different stuff going on at any one time. So quite often there's a company that I work for where I work on one show, and then when that one finishes, another one, ends up like I've worked 6 or 7 shows for the same production company. And then all the freelancers that you work with in that production company will all go to different production companies, and it just takes one of them to find a job for you, and then you're known to that production company. And I think a lot of freelancers will end up having, you know, a little circle of about, you know, 4 or 5 production companies that they just go between, depending on what jobs are available and what they fancy. Not as much as freelance work. There's definitely more freelance work. Quite often, you know, if you're really starting out, there might be an office receptionist or office runner job that will be more like a kind of, you know, you might get a year-long contract just to be an office runner, but while it does offer you job security, it might hinder you a little bit in being able to step up quicker. If you take, you know, somebody who might be on this chat, actually, somebody that I know through ScreenTalk Oxford, she came along for 1 day's work experience with me and impressed so much. She was better than our runners. She did all the things that I've just been talking about. And she was so good that they offered her a runner's job, and she was so good as a runner, they quickly promoted her to a camera assistant. So she was a camera assistant within like a couple of months of her first ever day of work experience. So there are definitely permanent jobs, but just have to think about whether you want that security or a chance to kind of progress quickly and get a lot of different experience. I would say that it's not imperative to have a kind of specific media degree. My recommendation, if there's somebody who really wants to make history documentaries and only history documentaries, I would say go and get a history degree, because you can get in at a bottom level without a kind of media degree. But if you really want to specialize in something, you better having a degree in that subject. If you want to be more of an all-rounder like me, then I would recommend a kind of more general media type degree. But yeah, it just depends what you want to do. But there are plenty of people who go straight from school into TV and work their way up the same as everybody else. And, you know, they might not have as good an understanding, or they might not be as skilled as some of the people that have done those courses, but they can catch that up on the job. They might not progress quite as quick, but some of them do if they're talented. Yeah, I mean, as much as you can do outside of the work, and like I was saying about work experience, the more experience you've got doing a broad range of things, the quicker you'll progress. There are some city-specific ones. I've been to similar kind of things in Bristol and Birmingham, but no, I wouldn't say I know this, like the CV kind of database things, like talented people and production base, and there's a few of those kind of things that are quite good for online networking. But I think that, I don't know as many in terms of things that are like ScreenTalk Oxfordshire. Like I said, the only thing that I can really think of would be just to kind of understand that your entry-level job isn't going to be a director, or just kind of understand the process. You probably will go in as a runner. So though, like I said, those people who contact me and say I'm a runner/director, just kind of gives the impression that they haven't really got a grasp of what's expected of them. Other than that, I mean, like I said, the kind of the non-relevant TV CVs are quite unlike job CVs where you can list everything. TV CVs, they only really want to see the relevant experience. They don't particularly want to know about stuff that you've done outside of the industry or outside of things that are relevant. So I just keep it really, really relevant and don't kind of waffle about. Heads of talent get literally thousands of CVs a year, so they just won't entertain reading about things that aren't relevant. Is that necessary? I do mine in lieu. I don't have a show reel, so when people ask for examples of my work, I just send them to my website. So that's the only reason I've got a website. The majority of people don't have a website. You know, if you're somebody that's starting out and you have got you know, some good experience, you made some good films, like a couple of people, like I said, that I've met through ScreenTalk, have already got a kind of wealth of films behind them. So if you've got somewhere to showcase that and you can put it on your CV, see my work here, then yeah, sure, why not? But I wouldn't say at this stage anything is kind of crucial, because every path is different. You never really know how you're going to get that foot in the door.